All right, guys, welcome back to The Last Southerners. Today I'm doing something a little different and share a personal story with you guys. And we're going to be talking about finances and where I was 8 years ago versus where I am now and the life lessons that I learned. And maybe I'll pass some of those off to you guys. If you're struggling with finances, then maybe you can utilize some of the things I'll introduce you to today and possibly help you out and help your family out like it did me. All right, so a little bit about my background is 8 years ago, I was living with my first wife, and we kind of lived paycheck to paycheck. Everything we had coming in, we would spend going out, and then we were upside down on our cars. We were paying high interest rates on our cars, any kind of personal loans. I had maybe 5 credit cards. I was paying a high interest rate in my mortgage. And what I had done up to that point is basically every time you get one bill paid off, you would then consolidate or move into another bill. Or I would tell myself, well, I paid that $100 bill off. I can go get something else, another payment for $100. And, you live like that and you fall into that lifestyle, living paycheck to paycheck. And then after a while, that's all you know. And I had never really had any kind of financial training or in high school or college. I never took any kind of finance class. So I didn't understand the basics that most people would get passed on through their parents or maybe a mentor. I'd never had anybody like that in my life. Basically, I had what I considered good credit, but basically I was just in debt up to my neck. And just because I had a decent credit score does not mean I had good credit, because to me, a decent credit score was any score that would allow you to get any kind of a loan. I didn't pay attention to interest rates or anything like that. I just seen something, and if I wanted it and I was approved for it, I wouldn't argue the payment. I wouldn't argue the interest rate. If I could afford it in my mind, and even sometimes when I couldn't afford it in my mind, I would do what I had to do to get it anyway. And that led to a series of bad decisions to where, every couple of years we would buy a new car and trade in this car we had and go upside down. And then we did the same with my spouse's cars. We did the same with recreational vehicles, as far as maybe boats or four-wheelers or anything we wanted. It was just easy to tell yourself that, hey, I'll just get a payment, I can afford it, and I'll get it. And what happens when you live in that type of lifestyle is whenever you have something big come up, as far as a medical bill or a car breakdown, or if you own your own house like we did, home expenses, say new hot water heaters, refrigerators, stoves, things of that nature. And then, when something tears up, you're like, how do I come up with $500 or even $1,000? I mean, that was just out of reach for us. And the obvious go-to would have been, well, I'll just get a loan. Well, so we lived like that. And then it kind of, it come to a head whenever I went through my divorce, and then I was faced with all of the bills because most of them were in my name. And all of a sudden I was having to deal with, lawyer expenses from going through a custody battle, as well as still paying, utility payments and rent and things like that on my old house, plus having to find somewhere new to live and, set up my life going forward. And I maintained it for about 2 to 3 months. And then I was just steady sinking, and I was so worried, and I was like, what am I going to do? How do I get out of this? And again, like before, I didn't have any mentors. So what I did is I was selling books at the time for Amazon. This is early on. And I ran across a book, and it was called Financial Peace University by Dave Ramsey. And I'll link that or show a picture in this video so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. And so what that book taught me was first of all, it taught me that I wasn't alone. There were several people just like me living in the book what they refer to as normal. And normal is just like I was, and most people are, living paycheck to paycheck, getting used to credit and financing everything, financing cars, financing, small loans, recreational vehicles, vacations. I mean, people finance all sorts of stuff, and I was no exception then. However, I read that book, and I was at my breaking point, and I was right before a bankruptcy, so I really didn't have a choice. I just needed guidance, and I needed to figure out how to move forward out of this hole. So the first thing I did is just take a real honest approach and look at my budget and my finances. And I seen that there was no way that I could afford the outgoing with what I had incoming. And I made decent money, but like I said, I was so far underwater that there was no pulling out of that based on my income. So the book teaches you to first make a plan, make a budget, be honest with yourself, and then get back to your basics that you need to live. Well, I knew I had to have a house, or I had to afford rent. I knew I had to have transportation to go to and from work. I knew I had to have groceries and basic utilities. And those are what I focused on. And in the meantime, I knew I was going to have credit card debt. I knew I was going to have, other debts that were going to go into collections. And it was inevitable, and it was going to happen anyway. So the best thing I could do is manage it and put it in somewhat of an order to chip away at it. So what the book, or Dave Ramsey's book, teaches you in what they call the 7 baby steps, is to take your debts. Once you have your basics that you need, food, clothing, shelter, once you have that budgeted, then you focus on your debts and you put them in order of smallest to largest. And what you create is what they call a debt snowball. And say the first bill I had was a small credit card for, I think, $200. Well, you take everything you can afford to budget for all of your bills, and you put that entire $200 into that, into paying that debt off. Because what he teaches you is to, every time you pay a bill off, you roll that into a snowball. Say if that particular payment was $50, well, then once you pay that off, you take that same $50 that you're used to paying on that bill, and you roll it over into your next smallest bill, which is, say, $100. Well, now you're paying $150 versus $100. And yes, on the back end, you're getting behind on some of your bills, but it was inevitable that you were going to get that way, or I was going to get that way anyway. So at least I had a plan and a sense of action. Okay. Something else that you want to do is you definitely want to take a credit report and be honest with yourself again and look at your credit report and everything on there. What I did is everything on there that I didn't recognize or that was really old, I disputed it. I disputed everything. And some of them I owed, some of them I didn't. I actually had, another Charles Jordan that was on my credit report, and I had to dispute that and get that taken care of. But there was a couple of bills that they just didn't even bother to dispute, so that went off of my credit report. Another thing I was able to do on some of my bills is to settle. And I called and say I owed $1,000. I was like, look, man, well, I'm 3 to 4 months behind. There's no way I'm going to have the money to pay you guys. What will you guys take to settle this debt? And you'd be surprised how many actual companies that will settle with you. Some of them will even offer you a settlement. But a good tip on that, if you do ever settle with a credit card company or any kind of, bill, I would just say any bill across the board, if you do settle, get it in writing and send them a certified check. So that way you have proof beyond proof that you paid that bill off, so it can't come back. Okay, so back to the budget. After I made a budget, the first thing he taught me in the book was to put $1,000 cash up for an emergency fund. And what he tells you is to get hyper motivated. He tells you to have yard sales, to work an extra job, to work overtime, whatever you can do to get that $1,000 cash, you do it. Because again, what you're building here is a motivation. You want to be excited and you want to be hyper focused about paying off this debt, because you're retraining your mind how to think about money the right way. And so he tells you to get that $1,000, and then I remember him saying put it behind your family picture and just having liquid cash in case you need it. So I did. I took $1,000 cash. I hid it, and I had it in case I needed it. And you'll be surprised at just how accomplished you feel once you get that $1,000. And, you have an emergency fund in place so that if you do have a breakdown or something, that you're like, okay, well, at least I have some type of plan B to handle this situation. So we've covered the snowball, we've covered the emergency fund. I think it's step 2, he tells you to take, to pay off all your debts. So in that time, if you have, say, a 401k or a stock portfolio that you're contributing to, he tells you to pause all of that. And I did. I was putting, I think, 5% or something into my retirement fund. And I took that money out, and for a short time, I didn't do anything with it. I just took that money and I started paying towards my debts, trying to pull out of that hole and get out of debt. Ultimately, I was able to, and it took, now this isn't something that was overnight. It took me a series of about 4.5 years and just throwing everything I can at the debt. And that meant not going on any vacations, not spending any extra, not having a flashy car, not having, basically anything fancy that he calls stuff, and even I call it that now, but not having anything fancy, just living off the basic necessities. And in his book, he calls it beans and rice. I mean, it wasn't quite that dramatic, but you do focus on paying off debt as a number one priority and your emergency fund. And so I got rid of my expensive cars. I had a brand new truck. I had another vehicle that was fairly new, and so I sold them both, and I bought what in his book he calls a beater, but basically it was just an older car that would get you from point A to point B, but it was something that we could pay off. By doing that move alone, I was able to get out from under, say, about $800 worth of car payments. And then for the first time in my life, I actually had a car that was paid for. And while it wasn't as elegant as other vehicles that I had drove before, it was just fine for what it was used for, to get you from point A to point B. And also the ability to now take that money that you were spending towards the car and put it towards your debt snowball. And so I did that. And then we started knocking out debt one after another, because the more that you pay off, the more that you're able to apply towards bigger and more expensive debts. And so again, getting back to, I guess it was about 4.5 years, and then we were completely debt free. And I can tell everybody that it just feels so less stressful being debt free, not having any collections people call, or not getting anything in the mail, or checking the mail and not worrying about this or that, or some bill that come. And it was just really nice. And then the next step he tells you is to take and save 3 to 6 months of living expenses. Well, once you pay off your bills, it's not that hard to do that, and you can just start sticking money in the bank. And we did, and we got to where we could afford if something was to happen, a crisis, where we were to lose our job for 3 to 6 months, then we would be just fine. And that would give us time to not have to rush into another position, but to then take time, look for something that is, that you'll feel rewarded at, and you can make a good salary, and you can contribute to a future. And so that was the next step. All right. And after that, I needed credit again. My credit had obviously bottomed out. So, and this wasn't in the step, this is a variation, but I knew that I wanted to buy another house, the house that I live in today. And my credit was so bad leaving my previous marriage, and before I got fiscally responsible, that I didn't know how I was going to get one. I did have a foreclosure, and I lost my house, so I had to rebuild from that. And the way I did it is I just got, and I think I read this in a Susie Orman book, but I got 2 secured credit cards for $500. And these are basically where you just take $500, you give it to a bank, and they give you a credit card, but your limit is only $500. Well, I kept both of those cards. Well, I kept them up until maybe a year ago, and I hardly used them, but if I did use them, I paid them right back the next month, and I never got over 30% of the debt on that card. So if it was $300, then I never got over $100, and I paid them perfect. So every month I was reported as good credit, good user. And what they'll do is, by looking at your activity, they want to entice you to spend, because they want you back in debt, because that's where they make their money. So they took and then would up that limit. and it was $500 one month. Then it went up to $1,000, then $1,500, $2,000, and I still have one of them, and I think it's like at six or $7,000 now, and I still never use it. I don't, just because I have that debt limit there, don't mean I'll ever be careless enough to use a credit card again. Because to me, that's just a way to fall back into that sense of normal, to where you stay upside down and you stay in debt. So I do keep it in case I ever need to rent a car, or if I go out of town for my job and I have to, somehow have one. I do have it, but at this stage in my life, I'm responsible enough not to use it. That's how that's how you rebuild your credit. And after a couple of years of doing that, I was able to finance a house with the lowest interest rate at the time, which was like a 4, and then I just refinanced it for like a 2. So, and that's all it took. Just focusing on, those secure credit cards for 2 years. All right. Another tip is term life insurance. I wanted to think about, okay, well, what now that I'm out of debt, what happens for my wife and my family if something was to happen to me and I was not able to provide for them? So I wanted to get term life insurance. I think my policy is around $500,000. So that if anything ever happens to me, then that income wouldn't be lost and they'd be able to sustain their lifestyle. So that's something that I did, and I felt good about it. And then I also got insurance on all my kids and my wife. And so that's another thing that you don't want to. You don't want to be in that situation and not be prepared. And I've not long ago, just a couple months ago, went through that situation, unfortunately. But it was a relief knowing that at least that particular part of that crisis was handled and it wasn't a financial burden on my family. So next up, Dave teaches you to, once you're out of debt, teaches you to invest 15% of your salary into a 401k. Well, I was lucky enough to have a job that contributed, I believe, 5%. 15% for me is actually 20%. So as soon as I got out of debt, I went ahead and opened my 401k back up and started heavily contributing to it. One of the biggest benefits of Dave Ramsey is just learning about money and learning how to focus on your future, because before I was only putting, say, 4% in it, and I don't even know if I was making the match. But, once you started being focused about your money and, putting a place for every dollar you spend, well, then you think more about the future and, how to build money. So he teaches you to take 15% and enter it into, basically he wants you to put your money into mutual funds. And so I followed that advice, and I've made a lot of money for my future self by doing that. And the next step he talks about is paying off your house. Now, in step 2, when he says put your debts in smallest to largest, he doesn't actually include the house on that, because most people just can't write a check and pay off a house. That's a big expense. So he wants you to have 3 to 6 months of living expenses before you go to that step. And that's currently where I preside now, trying to pay off my house. And we look for any kind of, again, we just financed it down to like a 2%. And you look for any kind of opportunities you have to pay extra on your mortgage so that you're not, paying this well into your 70s. And now, I've read online that there are some people that think Dave Ramsey is like a cult leader, or, they don't agree with his politics, so they don't agree with his, financial advice for some reason. Well, I've read a lot of his books and I've followed his radio show, and I don't necessarily agree with his politics, but, I definitely 100% agree with his advice. And I don't see it as any kind of scam. I mean, it's just simple. It's common sense advice for the average person that may have not had it, because I never had parents that taught me anything about finances. I had to learn it myself. And the way I learned it was through his books. I strongly recommend listening to his radio show. It's free. Listening or reading his books. He's got 2 or 3. Financial Peace University, I think, was the first one that I read. And he's got one called Total Money Makeover, and I read that too, and it was kind of similar to the first. What taking this content did for me was just get me focused every day on believing in myself that I could be out of debt. A few things that I'll mention, once you start being focused about your money, is you start doing things automatically. especially when you're trying to pay off your debt. You start totally rethinking money. Like, for instance, we would hardly ever eat out. If we did eat out, it would be in a situation where, we were traveling, we would get some off the dollar menu. But every day you're focused on save money, pay off debt. So we would eat at home more. And when you eat at home, you're eating healthier. And that really, that really was a benefit that passed on over into where we are now, say 8-9 years later, and we still don't go out to eat. We still, we've programmed ourselves to eat at home, make meals. And even now when I go to work, I'll make my lunches for the few days that I'm going to work, and I'll take them to work and I'll eat there. And I just won't, have no interest in eating out other than every now and then if it's a special occasion. Something else we do is secondhand stores, Goodwill, garage sales, Facebook Marketplace. We look for, used items that are, basically as good as buying new, but we'll take our time and look and search and find things like that. And something that we got from that is I've learned that, I love going garage selling. I love going to secondhand thrift shops. That's something that me and my daughter do, and one of our things. And, so there's a perk to that is I'm spending time with my family and it's something to do. And I'm also saving money along the way. Back to car payments, or back when I was living in debt, the first thing you go to a dealership and you wouldn't even call or discuss, or at least I wouldn't even discuss the total price of the car. I would discuss, well, how much a month is this? What is this payment? How much is this payment going to be? I wouldn't discuss interest rate, and I didn't pay attention to any of the details. My only concern back then was, what can you get my payment at? That's a terrible way to think about finances, and it's a terrible way to think about an automobile, because you're looped into buying, they can pretty much put anything in that car deal they want, and they can play with the money and stretch it out to longer terms. And if you're not focused on it, then if they get your payment at, say, $350 a month where you want it, you walk out of there thinking that you got a great deal. In reality, all they did is stretch your payment out, or adjust it somehow, and they probably tacked in all kinds of add-ons. You're in terrible shape and you're way upside down. So once you're hyper focused on your money, you don't look at buying big ticket items like that. We bought a car not long ago in Jacksonville. I went in and I negotiated with the guy, and I think he wanted $20,000 for the vehicle. And I was able to say, I'll give you $15,000 cash. He looks and he said, do you have cash? And I said, yes. Will you take it for the vehicle? And at first he's like, no, I can't do that. And they want to haggle you into financing because they want to send you to their banks and this and that. But I got up and I said, okay. And we were buying it for my daughter. So got up and started to leave. And then before I could hit the door, here comes his finance manager saying, hey, let's work this deal out. And just like that, he was able to come $5,000 off of the vehicle. Well, ultimately, we didn't want that vehicle anyway. She had changed her mind and wanted to go to another place, which, the concept was the same. The process was the same. We went and we were able to negotiate a good chunk off of the vehicle she actually did want. And we're able to do that simply by paying with cash. So by not financing and coming up with your own funds, you're able to save yourself. In that instance, we were able to save ourselves about $5,000. And that's the power that cash and buying with cash gives you, to where before, back in the way I used to think, I would have went in there and negotiated only for payment, and I would have had no say, and I would have probably paid $20,000 or more for that vehicle as long as he can maneuver it into a payment that I could afford. Which, once you learn about your finances, you don't make those mistakes. Let's see. Another tip is, if you're negotiating with a car dealer, look for things like gap coverage, extended warranty, local lot taxes. I've seen all sorts of things that they tried to throw in these contracts. They'll throw all these charges into your bill and stretch your payment out, and then you don't know to look for that. So by reading Dave Ramsey's books and just becoming hyper focused on my finances, you typically, before making any purchase, at least me, I'll go to review sites like Consumer Reports. I'll go to the Better Business Bureau and look at that dealership. I'll just read into, and you can even Google what are some scams to look out for when buying a car. And there'll be a list of things that, that you'll want to look out for. And then sure enough, by educating yourself, when you go into a car dealership and you start the negotiation process, as soon as you see these red flags, well, that'll give you a feel of what kind of dealer this is, and is this even a place that you want to do business with. So those are some things that you need to pay attention to. What else? Paying bills in bulk, like car insurance. There's several things, home insurance. There's several things that if you pay with cash, that you save yourself a lot of money. I think, for instance, I know to like our home insurance and auto insurance and everything is lumped into one bill. Well, we pay that every 6 months. They don't offer it annual, but we'll pay it every 6 months. And by doing that, I think we save around 10 to 15%. By saving that money, you're able to put more back into your pocket. And if you do have any small loans or anything, negotiate those suckers and see what they'll take. See if you can pay them off. Basically, any purchase you make, or at least me, any purchase I make, let these businesses compete for your business. I mentioned earlier that I just refinanced my house. Well, that process wasn't a 1 or 2 day thing. I took several weeks, and I ran my credit with about 5 or 6 different lending institutions, and I would take the offer that they would give me, and I would take that offer and I would send it to, say, Loan Depot. Then I would take the Loan Depot offer and I would send that to Quicken, and I would take the Quicken offer and send that to a credit union. And I just kept on negotiating the prices down and the fees down to the lowest interest rate and the lowest amount of fees. And you'll be surprised at what these lending institutions can do to get your loan. And I think that, like my example is, I think I closed my house and only had $1,400 worth of fees, which is unheard of and something I would have never thought about on my first mortgage, because again, you're just happy to get the mortgage at that time, and you don't think anything about rates or fees or any of this. So any major purchase, and I don't care if it's for a car, if it's for a recreational vehicle, I would even negotiate a television. I mean, once you get hyper-focused about your money, you negotiate anything and everything. You try to shoot to pay cash for it, and if people will come off of that overall price with cash, do it. In Dave Ramsey's book, he says that the first offer that you make someone for any particular item, it should make you feel a little uncomfortable. And it does. I mean, I've offered people several thousand less for an item, and sometimes they'll say no, and then you start the negotiation process. Okay, well, what will you take? This is what I'll pay. In some cases, they'll come down and take that first offer. Just depends on how bad they want to sell it and how bad you want it. But my best advice is to definitely negotiate everything. That's about it. Just wanted to share a little bit of how I do my finances and maybe give someone out there some tips or advice. 8 years ago, I was sweating it. I was in debt up to my knees, completely worried, almost ashamed of my financial situation. I would make money only so that I could turn around and pay this bar or this lending institution or that lending institution or this credit card or something to that effect. And now, 8, 9 years later, I don't have that issue. My house is not paid off yet, but it will be, and I'm confident on that. Anytime I have any kind of a car breakdown or a medical expense or any kind of financial situation, I can pretty much take care of it. One more thing before I close: family and friends and boundaries. Okay, if it's okay to help your family out. It's okay to help your friends out. I'm sure you love them. These relationships are probably the most valuable relationships you'll ever have, but you don't necessarily have to loan them money. I tell my friends and family, if they want to borrow money, if I can afford to give it to them, I'll give it to them, and it'll be a gift, and I'll never ask for it back. But if I can't afford to outright give it to them, then it's just too bad. There has to be a boundary set up there. If I can't afford to give it to them, I just don't. And that goes with loaning any kind of money. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to become someone's bill collector, and you don't want every time you see that person in public, them thinking, well, I owe him money, or, you just don't want that type of relationship with your family and your friends. And I never have either. So that's my advice on any kind of loaning money to family or friends. You just focus on yourself. And if you're in a position to help them, write them a check, give it to them. Don't ask for it back because you don't want to sever that relationship. Okay, that's been it. I've been Daniel. This is The Last Southerners. This is my financial story. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys soon. Bye.